Hola y bienvenidos a este video donde vamos a hablar sobre el examen de escritura de GCSE Spanish. In this video we're going to focus specifically on the foundation tier paper. Los retos de esta clase son conocer todas las partes del examen escrito, entender lo que hay que hacer para triunfar en este examen y aprender un acrónimo para recordar el criterio de éxito. The goals of this lesson are to get to know all of the different parts of the written exam, to understand what we have to do, what one has to do to triumph, to succeed in this written exam, and then we're going to learn an acronym which will help you to remember the success criteria, all the boxes that you need to tick to get the best mark that you possibly can. Antes de todo, ¿cuáles son las partes del examen? So before we look at anything else, let's look at what the parts of the exam, what the different sections of the exam are. So the foundation tier writing exam consists of 4 different sections, the first one of which is a photo which you need to write 4 statements about, and that one's worth 8 marks, so 2 marks per statement. The second section is a 40-word question which is based on 4 bullet points, and that one's worth 16 marks. The third section is a translation activity where you need to translate 5 sentences from English into Spanish. And then finally, section 4 is a 90-word question, again based on 4 bullet points, and again it's worth 16 marks. And this is what's called the crossover question because it's section 4 of the foundation paper and it's section 1 of the higher paper. So all students will do this question. All 4 of the sections, the whole exam, is going to be based on content that you've looked at in the GCSE topics. But you won't know which topics are going to come up until you're actually in the exam. So that's why it's important to make sure you revise vocabulary from all of the different topics so that you're prepared for anything that might come up. For section 1, you need to write 4 short statements about a picture, and there's generally people in the picture. Each statement is worth 2 marks, and to get both marks you need to make sure you include a verb. So say you see 3 people, you couldn't just write tres personas, you'd have to write hay 3 personas, or veo 3 personas, or puedo ver 3 personas, so you need the verb as well to get both marks. Arguably, these are the easiest 8 marks you can get in the whole exam. It's really easy to get these because even if you're stuck, you can generally talk about the people, how many people are in the picture. You could just say, there are 3 people, there's a boy, there's a girl, there's a man, there's a woman. You could talk about the weather, you could say hace sol, pienso que hace frío. You could talk about what people are doing, their emotions, what they're wearing. You could physically describe the people, talk about their hair colour, eye colour. So they're quite easy marks to get. And as I said, if you get stuck, you can just talk about weather, clothes, emotions, and what you can see in the picture. What you won't get marks for is saying what's not in the photo or saying your opinion of the picture itself. So if you said, me gusta la foto, you wouldn't get the mark. You can give opinions like, pienso que la chica está feliz, I think that the girl is happy. You can say, pienso que hace frío, I think that it's cold, even if you can't really tell from the picture. Those sorts of things are fine, but you don't get the marks if you just say you like or you dislike the photo, or you say no hay, and then you say what isn't in there. Now, if we were confronted with this picture, this is what the exam sheet looks like. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, each statement worth 2 marks. So we look at the picture, there's quite a lot we could say about this one. We could talk about their clothes, we could physically describe them, we could talk about what they're doing, we could talk about their emotions, they look quite happy. We could say simply, hay 3 personas, there are 3 people. We could talk about where they are, location. Están en una cafetería, they're in a cafe. El chico toca la guitarra, the boy is playing the guitar. Están felices, or we could extend that and say, pienso que están felices, I think that they're happy. That would get you 8 marks out of 8, so it's quite easy to succeed in this first section of the exam. Section 2 is the 40-worder, and to succeed in this you need to make sure you answer all of the questions, all aspects of the question, and that means answering all 4 bullet points. You don't need to write the same amount about each bullet point. You might write a couple of sentences for one, 3 sentences for another one, but you need to make sure you've ticked all those bullet points off. So to ensure you do this, my recommendation is that before you jump in and start writing, you work out and you make sure you know what the bullet points mean, what tenses they're asking you to respond in, and then you start to plan your answer to make sure you're definitely going to hit the nail on the head. Make sure you refer to at least 3 time frames. That can just be a past tense, using the present tense and then using a future tense, and also include a couple of opinions. That's what you need to do to get into that very top grade boundary. It's also good practice to make sure you give reasons for your opinions. It might be with practice that you get better and better and you end up doing the higher paper, and in the higher paper it's essential that you give opinions and justifications for your opinion. So it's best that everyone, regardless of what tier we're currently thinking of sitting, it's just a good habit to get into to always say pienso que, or en mi opinión, give an opinion, and then always back it up with por qué, blah blah blah, or ya que, blah blah blah, always giving a reason. Now the mark scheme for this one splits the 16 marks into content and language, 10 marks for content and 6 marks for quality of language. All the bullet points need to be covered, but as I said, you don't need to write exactly the same number of words about each one. And anything that's off topic, anything that can't be in any way seen as relevant to any of the bullet points, it won't be taken into account when the examiner marks for content, but it will be taken into account for marking the quality of language. So any mistakes in irrelevant stuff you write might count against you, but it's unlikely to get you any extra points. So it's best just to stay focused on answering the question and ticking off those 4 bullet points. To give you an idea of just how missing any of the bullet points can cap your marks, to get into the 9 to 10 mark category, you need to have all 4 bullet points ticked off. You need to have said something that clearly answers those bullet points. If you miss one, you don't quite tick that one off, then that's going to limit you to 5 to 8 marks. So you won't get any more than 8 out of 10 unless you've mentioned all 4 bullet points. Just mentioning 2 won't get you any more than 4 marks, and only mentioning one of the bullet points means even if what you write is wonderful, you won't get more than 2 marks. Section 3 is the translation task, and for this one you need to translate all aspects of 5 sentences from English into Spanish, and those sentences, like everything else, will be based on the content from the GCSE themes and topics. The marks for this question are split into 2 categories. The first is conveying key messages, and that means that even if the language isn't perfect, you get the message across. The second one is application of grammatical knowledge of language and structures, which is a really long-winded way of saying you know the vocabulary and you know the grammar, and you've shown your knowledge of that by translating everything accurately. To get top marks, you need to translate every single part of the sentences and ensure that you've used the correct tenses, the correct verb endings and adjectival endings and things like that to demonstrate you've got a good knowledge of grammar and vocab. If you miss out any parts of the translation because you're not sure of one of them, or you're not sure of a part of one of them, the examiner will have to consider that had you have attempted it, you would have made major errors. So it's better to have a go and make a couple of minor errors, because as you'll see when we look at the mark scheme, you might get an extra couple of ticks just by having a go. So looking at the mark scheme, this is the criteria that the examiners use for marking the key messages. Now you can get 5 out of 5 marks, that's the best you can get on this section of the translation. But the key messages aren't just tick for a mark. Basically the translation, those 5 sentences on the mark scheme, they're split into 12 key messages. And each one of those is worth a tick. Now a tick isn't worth a mark. If you have a look at the total ticks and how they translate into marks, you'll see that whether you get 7, 8 or 9 ticks, you'll still get 3 marks. So that's where having a go and getting 1 extra tick because you got part of the message across might be the difference between getting 3 out of 5 or getting 4 out of 5 on this one. Minor errors for this won't lose you the tick. What the examiner will do is just ask themselves, would a native speaker get the message? So if you said voy al playa instead of voy a la playa, you'd probably still get the tick, because if you said that to a Spanish person or a Latin American person, they'd probably get what you were saying. So have a go at this one. That's the key message really. Don't leave any parts blank, because this is about expressing the message, communicating the general idea, not necessarily getting it perfectly correct. Now on the other hand, the application of grammatical knowledge of language and structures does require you to show that you know your vocabulary, you know your accents, your spellings, you know what tenses you're using, and you're remembering to make sure your adjectives match up with the gender of the nouns they're describing and things like that. So to get 5 out of 5 on this one, you need to demonstrate you've got a very good knowledge of vocabulary and grammatical structures and be highly accurate. That doesn't mean you don't make any mistakes whatsoever, but just that most of the time you've demonstrated that you know your stuff. You might miss an accent here or there. There might be one occasion where you use the wrong article, you put la instead of el, you can still get 5 out of 5 for that. Now we're going to have a look at the section 4 crossover question, which is the 90 words question, which is section 4 in this foundation paper, and it's section 1 on the higher paper. So the exact same question is in the two papers. For this, it's important that you answer all aspects of the question, and that means writing about all of the 4 bullet points. Not necessarily equally, so you might write about some more than others, but it's essential that you mention at least something that really ticks the box for each of those 4 bullet points. To ensure that you do this, it's good to first work out what the bullet points mean. Look out for the question words. Is it asking you, what do you do? When do you do something? What do you like? What tense is it asking you to respond in? Is it asking you what you did yesterday, what you did last year, next year? Is it asking you what you normally do? So first look at what the bullet points mean and try and translate them into English if you can, and really highlight the tenses and what they're actually about. You also need to make sure you refer to at least 3 time frames. Now this can just be past, present and future, and it's really good to make sure you explicitly refer to them, so use phrases like ayer, el año pasado, el año que viene, el próximo año, and it's also important that you include a couple of opinions. And it's always good practice to make sure that you give reasons for your opinions as well. So don't just say pienso que las vacaciones en España son interesantes, son fantásticas. Also give a reason, ¿por qué me encanta ir a la playa? So to make this make a bit more sense, we're going to look at an actual exam question. Now this is from a foundation exam paper, so that's why it says 4.1, but this in the higher tier paper would be exactly the same question, it would just be called 1.1. So first, the key thing here is that you get a choice. So think about your options. Before you throw yourself right into 1.1, the first question that comes up, have a look at the second question because they're going to be on 2 different topics, and probably one of those topics you'll feel a bit more confident about. You might know a bit more vocabulary for it. It might be one that you looked at or you revised more recently. So look at your choices first, and then when you've picked a question to answer, think about what the topic is, and this can be part of the choosing process as well. Think about, okay, this is on the theme of free time. I know quite a lot of vocab for free time, and I revised this last week, so I'm going to do this one. Have a look at the register. So this one's asking you to write a blog for a website. So this should make you think about what sort of language you're going to use. You could start off by saying, hello, welcome to my blog, or something like that. You don't have to, but sometimes it might ask you to write a letter to a friend, in which case you might say, hello, I hope you're well, and things like that. So think about the register, and then we'll have a look at the bullet points. Thinking about the tense, ¿qué hiciste? That's the past tense. Si prefieres ir de vacaciones, that's talking about our preferences, so that's present tense. ¿Qué vas a hacer? That's the future tense. What are you going to do? And then we've got, again, talking about our preferences, what we like to do, so that one's going to be the present tense. So that should make us think about, for each of those bullet points, what language do we need to use, what tenses do we need to use in our answer, and we need to make sure we mention all 4 of those. Try and be as explicit, as obvious as you can. What did you do in your holiday last year? Para mis vacaciones el año pasado fui a España. Be as clear as you can that you've seen that bullet point, you've understood it, and you've responded to it as clearly as you possibly could. Because the examiners imagine that they're looking for every reason to give you a lower mark. Don't let them. And it is a 90-word question. You don't need to have spot on 90 words. You won't be penalised if you do a bit less or a bit more. If you do a bit less, it might mean you haven't given quite enough detail, but it's fine if you go over. But everything will be marked. So if you do go over, make sure that it's good stuff, because if not, it might count against you. Now the must-haves for this 90-word question are at least 3 tenses, some opinions, and ideally some reasons to justify the opinions, and some extra details like descriptions, time phrases, and who with. The reason I tell you to explicitly refer to when things happen, like saying last year or next year, is because if you get the grammar a bit wrong and you don't quite get the tense quite right with the verb, at least the examiner knows what you're trying to say. So if you said, el año pasado voy a ir a España, so last year I'm going to go to Spain, it's a bit confusing, but the examiner can see, okay, you've said last year, so you're probably trying to say I went. So it won't lose you quite as many marks. So it's kind of like it backs you up a bit. And the optional extras you can include to get the highest possible mark are things like other people's opinions. So instead of pienso que, you could say mi amigo piensa que. And some extra tenses. Throwing in something like diría que, I would say that. It's a really useful trick because you get a conditional tense in and you're giving an opinion at the same time. And you could also put in a conditional like me gustaría ir, I would like to go. So for example, ¿qué hiciste en tus vacaciones el año pasado? What did you do on your holidays last year? You could talk about what you did, and then you could say this year I would like to go to whatever place, and that way you're throwing in an extra tense and really showing off your skills in Spanish. So now let's take a look at how we can respond to the very first bullet point of that exam question. ¿Qué hiciste en tus vacaciones el año pasado? What did you do on your holiday last year? Now a really basic answer would be fui a España. But remember I said the examiner's almost looking for reasons not to give you the mark. They might think, okay, I went to Spain, but was that last year? That could have been 5 years ago. And was it even a holiday? You could have been going there to visit family. So you're better off being really specific and saying el año pasado fui a España. And that's your insurance policy by using el año pasado. If you get the word fui a bit wrong and you write fue or voy a España, then at least you've used the sentence last year so the examiner gets an idea of what you're trying to say. As long as the message is communicated, you'll get the mark. But you still haven't said on holiday, so we could improve that by saying el año pasado fui a España de vacaciones. That's a good answer to this bullet point, but it's not yet perfect. Who did you do it with? El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia. Extra details, that's going to climb us up the mark scheme. But we still haven't given any opinions yet, so we could throw an opinion in there. El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue divertido. It was fun, fantastic. We've put an opinion in there, but we still need to justify that opinion. Why was it fun? El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue muy divertido. Okay, so we've improved our opinion a bit more by adding a quantifier, but we still haven't given a reason. El año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue muy divertido porque fuimos a la playa. There it is, we've got what we did, when we did it, who we did it with, what we thought of it, and why we've got that opinion. It was fun because we went to the beach. That would be a really strong answer, but we could still give even more detail to make sure we get a really good mark. So finally, we could say, el año pasado fui a España de vacaciones con mi familia y fue muy divertido porque fuimos a la playa. Me encanta nadar en el mar. I love swimming in the sea. That's another opinion. Me gustaría volver este año. I would like to go back this year. That's a conditional tense. Pero mi madre quiere ir a Francia. And there we're talking about what our mother wants to do. So we're showing knowledge of how to use the third person in Spanish as well. So this one would get you a much higher mark than any of the other ones because it has a wider range of language, it has a wider range of tenses and grammar and vocabulary, and it really shows confidence using the Spanish language. Now, to help you remember all the different things you need to do on the success criteria, I've come up with a bit of an acronym. And that acronym is POP-FUDGE. It's maybe not the best or the most memorable, but hopefully it will help you to remember the following things. So it stands for present, opinion, past, future, opinion, justifications. Now, when you're in the exam and you're going through the bullet points and you're translating the different things and you're highlighting what tenses you need to use, you could in the top corner just write POP-FUDGE with a little checkbox next to each letter, and then when you're writing, tick it off as you're going. And then if you get to the end and you have a couple of things you haven't ticked off, you know to quickly add another sentence in and use those things. So the present tense, it's almost impossible not to use the present tense. So that one's one that you'll take off quite early on. For giving your first opinion, you could use things like en mi opinión or pienso que to be really clear to the examiner that you're giving an opinion. Instead of just saying fue divertido, it was fun, you could say en mi opinión fue divertido. Just to be extra clear, this is an opinion, give me the mark. For the past tense, you only need to use one past, one future, but you could just do present tense and two past tenses, and you'll obviously get a slightly higher mark if you do show that you can use a really good range of tenses. So you could use the preterite tense. For example, if we were talking about listening to music in our free time, we could say ayer escuché música. We could use the perfect tense. Hoy he escuchado música. Today I have listened to music. And we could use the imperfect tense. Cuando era joven, escuchaba música. When I was younger, I listened, or I used to listen, to music. Future tenses, we could use the near future. Mañana voy a escuchar música. So the verb ir plus an infinitive. We could use the simple future. Mañana escucharé música. Tomorrow I will listen to music. It doesn't matter which ones you use, as long as you use your present tense, one past, one future as a minimum, and then anything else is a bonus. For your second opinion, instead of using the same phrases, pienso que, en mi opinión, you could say something a bit more higher level, like diría que. I would say that because that means you're then showing the examiner, hey, I can use the conditional tense as well. And you could talk about what someone else thinks about something. Según mi madre, according to my mum, you could say según mi amigo. And then finally, remembering to give your justifications, your reasons for what you think, what you feel about things. ¿Por qué? Because, ya que, since. So now I'm going to show you the mark scheme that examiners and your teacher will use to mark a 90-word question. So the question's worth 60 marks in total, and these marks are split into content and language, 10 marks for content and 6 marks for the quality of language. So as you can see, actually the content is more important than actually how good the Spanish that you use is, and that's why it's so important to do all 4 bullet points. All of the bullet points need to be covered, but not necessarily equally, so you could write 2 sentences on one, 3 sentences on another, that's not a problem. Anything irrelevant, so anything that's not relevant in any way to any bullet point, it will be ignored when marking for content, so it won't gain you anything for content, but it will be taken into account when marking quality of language. So the message there is don't go off topic, because you won't get any points for it, but you could lose points if you make mistakes in your language for that irrelevant content. Plus you'll lose time, which is valuable time that you'll need for the other sections of the paper. Looking at how the bullet points are of importance, missing even just one bullet point, it will cap your content marks. Even if everything you say about the other 3 is really, really good, it will still cap your marks. So to get anything above 7 out of 10, so to get 7, 8, 9 or 10 out of 10, you need to have all 4 bullet points. If you just mention 3, you accidentally miss one, or you don't mention it in a way that's clear enough to the examiner, it will limit you to a maximum of 6 marks. 2 bullet points will get you no more than 4 marks, and if you only mention 1 bullet point, you'll be capped at 1 to 2 marks. So hopefully that makes you realise how important it is to stick to the bullet points and be absolutely clear in your response that you're talking about those bullet points. In terms of opinions, not including enough opinions can also cap your mark, even if you've mentioned all the bullet points, even if you've said really good stuff, really loads of detail. To get above 7, you need to have 2 opinions. Only including 1 opinion, it will limit you to between 3 and 6 marks. Even if it's great, you've got 3 tenses, you've mentioned all of the bullet points, if you just forget to give more than 1 opinion, you won't get any more than 6 out of 10 for content. And including no opinions whatsoever could limit you to 2 marks. And it's always a good idea to get into the habit of giving reasons for your opinions, and that's because it's essential in section 2. So it's best to just do it for both sections anyway, and then you're in the habit of doing it. Now, to give you a clearer idea of exactly what the examiner is looking at when they mark your work, other than the bullet points and the opinions, this is the criteria that is used to decide your content mark. So to get up into that top band, 9 out of 10 marks for content, or 10 out of 10 marks for content, you need a very good response that covers all aspects of the task, which you would do if you write a couple of sentences at least on all of the bullet points. Communication is clear, so that means you're getting your messages across, and a lot of information is conveyed. That's where if you just wrote 1 sentence about a bullet point, like when we looked at the pyramid, if you just said, I went to Spain with my family, that's not a lot of information. Whereas if you say it was great, it was fantastic, we went to the beach, I love to swim in the sea, next year I'm going to go back, That's a lot of information being conveyed. And then finally, opinions are expressed. So if you want to pause the video and have a read through that, please do. And if not, we'll have a look at the language criteria next. For marking your work in terms of your quality of language, which is a mark out of 6, this is the criteria that the examiner will refer to. So if we look at the top one, to get 5 or more marks out of 6, you need to use a variety of appropriate vocabulary. That means that whatever the GCSE topic is that is being brought up, let's say it is holidays, you're showing that you know lots and lots of words in that theme. So if it's about holidays and you say you go to Spain, if you talk about sunbathing, water sports, eating tapas, staying at a hotel, swimming in the sea, the more vocabulary you can use to demonstrate that you've got a really in-depth knowledge of that theme, the better. Complex structures and sentences are attempted. That means you've had a go at saying some more complex things, some extended sentences. Maybe you've had a go at saying something in the conditional tense. You don't need to get it perfectly correct, but actually just having a go demonstrates to the examiner that you're aiming high. You need to have your 3 tenses, your 3 time frames, which are largely successful, and that's where you can get things a little bit wrong. But your insurance policy is to use words like and phrases like next year, yesterday, last week, so that if you do get the grammar a bit wrong, you still get the message across. Your errors are mainly minor, but you can make some serious errors and still get into this top band, especially if those errors happen in more complex, more complicated sentences that you're attempting. The key thing is that the intended meaning is not always clear, but nearly always clear. So if you were to say these things to a native speaker, they'd get more or less what you're trying to say. And then finally, the style and register are appropriate. So if it's a blog, it reads like a blog. If it's a letter, it reads like a letter. And that brings us to the end of this video. Muchísimas gracias por ver. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it's been useful. Some next steps you might want to take. The first one is just to practice, practice, practice. Practice really does make perfect. You can practice these sorts of questions by asking your teacher for past papers or going onto the exam websites and looking for them yourself, and practicing all the different tenses that you might need to use, the opinion phrases. There is an art to writing really good exam responses. Part of that art is knowing what sorts of boxes you're trying to tick, and I hope that this video has helped you understand the other side of the process and what examiners are looking for in your work. Secondly, any grammar that you looked at in this video and you thought, actually, I don't feel that confident using the preterite tense, or I don't think I could use the conditional that confidently, go back and revise it, or ask your teacher for some help revising that particular tense. Anything you think from watching this that might let you down in the exam, any of those elements in the acronym that you feel less secure with, go away. You know what you need to work on, and practice, 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 and revise for that. Otra vez, muchísimas gracias por ver y espero que te vaya muy bien con el español.